All right, so in this video, we're going to talk about GNM codes, and there's two major types of programming types, and the ones that we'll explore in class are absolute and relative programming. So I have two different layouts. You can see that we have our X and Y axes. You'll notice that our points A, B, and C, they're both the same graphs, right? So we're going to imagine this as a tool path. So a drill bit coming in, or a milling end coming in and starting in our part, and then creating this tool path. I'm not going to go over the Z axis going above and below the part too much in this one, or at all actually, just because I want to get to you guys kind of the intuition of what's the program going to look, how is it going to look differently in between absolute and relative, and how they end up producing the same thing, but just through different types of programming. Absolute is not as flexible as relative as far as producing parts, just because absolute, you have a fixed position starting point, and if you wanted to change where this line started, then you would have to change the programming for all three of these points. Relative programming, you would only have to change where the starting point is. So that's kind of the benefit of it as far as relative is concerned. Okay, so for absolute, you would start with, let's say that we're in the part, we're milling, the tool's on. I'm not going to go over how to start it right now. I just want to get from here to here to here. It works like a map, and it's pretty straightforward. It's the easiest one to kind of understand. So you would say G01. Okay, G01 is just our regular straight line movement. And our X and our Y are currently at 2, 2. Okay, and so we'll say that we started at 2, 2, 0. Actually, sorry, 2, 2. We'll call it negative 0.5. Okay, so we're in the part, negative 0.5. And we want to go from here to here. Well, the next one that you would put in would be point B, and it would be G01. And you would say 4, 5. And you could put negative 5 there, but you don't have to, but I'm just going to put it in there just for our purposes. Okay, so we went from, here's A, this is B, and then G01 is... for C is going to be 8, 5, and we can leave it at negative 0.5. Okay, so pretty straightforward. Like you have a map, like you're going from one point to another, right? That's like why we start you with it. It's really easy to understand. Like I went from this point to this point to this point. Relative is a little different. Where this one, the absolute programming is going from point to point to point. This one is how far did it travel between each point. So I want you to think about how far it traveled. How far it travels. Okay, so that's what we're really thinking about in the relative programming. All right, so we're still going to go straight line interpolation. Okay, so G01. And you usually start at the correct, you start at the same point, right? And then we would change the programming, and I'll show you how to do that later, okay? So we're going to start at the same point, okay? And I'll show you, like when we do the actual setup on our code template, how do we get from this into telling the machine that we're reading it in relative? Okay, so our next line is still going to be G01. And then how is it moving to the next point? So here's A, we want to go to B, and so how far did it move on the x-axis? Okay, glad the phone is updated. Okay, so how far did it move on the x-axis? Well, on the x-axis, it moved 2 spaces. Okay, so it moved from here to here on the x-axis, and on the y-axis, it moved 3 spaces, and it moved 3 spaces up. So that's a positive and a positive. And we didn't change the z-axis, so we actually want to leave that one alone this time. Because if we put -5 in here, it would actually drill down into the part another ½ inch. We don't want it to drill into the part another ½ inch. We just want it to leave it alone. Okay, we don't want to move the z-axis. It's where it's at, where it's supposed to be on the z-axis. We don't want to move it anymore. And then our next line, GO1. So we moved 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. So 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces on the x-axis. And we didn't move up and down on the y-axis at all. So we would actually, you could leave it blank or you could put 0 there. I'm going to leave it blank. Okay, so you would leave this blank and this blank because we didn't go up and down on the y-axis and we didn't change the z-axis. We're still milling at that same part. So again, relative is how far it travels. Okay, we're talking about how far is it traveling in the x-axis, how far is it traveling in the y-axis. So let's add another point down here just to get our point across. Man, get it? Lots of points. So we're going to add line D down here, and we want to go all the way down to point D. And point D is, well, this is 8, this is 9, 10. So point D is 10 and 1. Okay, so point D is 10, 1. Well, you're not going to put in point. If you put in 10, 1 for this, it's going to end up like somewhere up here because it would go 10 spaces on the x-axis and then 1 space up. We want it to go down 4 spaces on the y-axis and add 2 spaces on the x-axis. So if we are going down, so the number is getting smaller from 5 to 1, you would actually say -4. Okay, so we are subtracting on the y-axis. Oops, sorry. -4 on the y-axis. And we are adding on the x-axis, so that would be 2. Sorry about that. Okay. So hopefully this is starting to make sense. Again, relative is how far it's moving. It's not go to a certain point. This is how far is it moving on the x-axis, how far is it moving on the y-axis. And this one is you go to that point, that's the only point you're going to go to. Okay, this point you go to this point. Okay, this one is how far did it move from each point. So we could even say like what plus 2 equals 4? Well, 2. What plus 2 equals 5? 3. Okay, and then from 4 to 8 is 4 spaces. That's where we're getting this 4 from. 5 to 5 is 0 spaces, so we left it blank. Okay, so hopefully that kind of makes sense to you guys. We're going to get into actually how to write use the template and what codes to use for your initials project that you're working on. And that's it for right now. Thanks for watching.